A few years ago, Neil deGrasse Tyson was asked about God on CBS, and in his response, he challenged the interviewer with one of the hardest questions for Christians to answer.
Do you believe in God?
Me?
Creator?
Yeah, so the more I look at the universe, just the less convinced I am that there is something benevolent going on. So if your concept of a creator is someone who's all powerful and all good, that's not an uncommon pairing of powers that you might ascribe to a creator. All powerful and all good. And I look at disasters that afflict Earth and life on Earth. Volcanoes, hurricanes, tornadoes, earthquakes, disease, pestilence, congenital birth defects. You look at this list of ways that life is made miserable on Earth by natural causes. And I just ask, how do you deal with that? But if you've got some good evidence, bring it.
So the interviewer didn't end up addressing his challenge at all. And so what I'm going to do now is show you a speech by John Lennox where he properly addresses the problem of natural evil and gives the evidence in the case that Neil deGrasse Tyson is looking for. So I'm going to let that speech play out, and then I'm going to give my own thoughts about it on the back end. Let's get into it.
As sensitively as I can, I'm going to not, ladies and gentlemen, insult you by offering you simplistic panaceas, answers to this question. What I'm going to try to do is to share with you what I found helpful as a way into this that can begin to make some sense. And I couldn't help thinking of Richard Dawkins when he talks about the ultimate nature of reality in this direction. And when he says this universe is just as you would expect it to be. In a universe of blind physical forces and genetic replication, some people are going to get hurt, other people are going to get lucky, and you won't find any rhyme or reason in it or any justice. The universe we observe, writes Dawkins, has precisely the properties we should expect if there is at the bottom no design, no purpose, no evil, and no good. Nothing but blind, pitiless indifference. DNA neither knows nor cares. DNA just is. And we dance to its music. I've mentioned that to Richard Dawkins publicly several times. He's never retracted it. And ladies and gentlemen, we need to face this analysis because it is increasingly prevalent in the academy. Listen carefully to what it says. There is no good, there is no evil. But half a minute. Do I hear Richard Dawkins complaining that God is evil? I do. But if there's no good and no evil, that is a meaningless statement. Now, this is enormously important. I know it's theoretical, but it is important. The logical consequence of Dawkins' attitude is to abolish the categories of good and evil. But if you do that, ladies and gentlemen, it's idle to talk about God being evil or the world being evil because there isn't any good or evil. Now, the reason, of course, that Dawkins still talks about evil is that he discovers, as you and I discover, all of us, that we are moral beings. Whether we believe in God or not, we've got a sensitivity to right and wrong, to good and bad, to justice and injustice, and therefore, whether we are an atheist or not, we look at Auschwitz and we say it's evil. But that's beginning to make a hole in naturalism. Because if the logical consequence of believing there is no God is to abolish the categories of good and evil, then the logical consequence of admitting that these categories exist is to reintroduce the possibility that there is a God with all the problems that that brings with it. We've had some awful shootings in recent days. If the shooters were just dancing to the music of their DNA, can you blame them? Of course not. 9/11. Just dancing to the music of their DNA, were they? How could you possibly blame them? We know in our hearts that that cannot be true. Charles Taylor, in his brilliant book, The Secular Age, writes this: the modern age, more or less repudiating the idea of a divine lawgiver, has nevertheless tried to retain the ideas of moral right and wrong, not noticing that in casting God aside, they have also abolished the conditions of meaningfulness for moral right and wrong as well. And that is a supreme irony to my mind. And so, although atheism seems immediately to offer a solution, this is just how it is, it's brute fact, we have to accept it. Actually, it doesn't offer a solution at all. It makes the situation even more difficult. What can atheism say in the context of massive injustice? Hitler murders 6 million Jews, and then he takes a gun and he blows his head off, and he's got away with it because he will never have to face any ultimate question of responsibility. Is that true? I think there's something in every human being that says that cannot be true. Now, of course, a feeling in our hearts that something cannot be true doesn't mean it isn't true. But as C.S. Lewis pointed out, it would be very strange if in a world where we find ourselves with an appetite for food, there was no food. In a world where we find an appetite for sex, there was no sex. If in a world where we find we have an appetite for friendship and justice and morality, there was none. He said it would be a very strange world. And Richard Dawkins said to me once, yes, the picture I paint is bleak, but that doesn't mean it's false. I said, Richard, it doesn't mean it's true either. We've got to investigate the evidence, ladies and gentlemen, as we find our way into this very difficult problem. According to the Christian worldview, there is to be a final judgment. That's a big thing to say in contemporary society, isn't it? It's an even bigger thing to claim that the final judge has already been appointed. His name is Yeshua, Jesus Christ. You say you don't seriously believe that as an Oxford professor? Yes, I do. I don't know what the Oxford professor has got to do with it. And I'm not the only one. Ladies and gentlemen, whatever you make of it, one of the most marvelous things, it seems to me, is the concept that there will be a judgment. Because it means that our conscience that tells us about right and wrong is not ultimately an illusion. People do not like these days to talk about judgment because they haven't really thought about it. Would you like to live in the United States without police and law courts? Very few of you would be old enough to remember what happened when the lights went out in New York in the early 20th century. And people went completely wild in looting. It was one of the most amazing things. Once the eye of the law had gone, there are many books written on this particular topic. It's fascinating. We do want judgment, but not me, please. That's the problem. The Christian claim, ladies and gentlemen, is this: ultimately, this world is going to be judged totally fairly, and justice will be done. Do you know what that does for me? It gives me something that atheism by definition cannot give me, and that's hope. By banishing God from the equation, you have by definition banished all hope. Now here, ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to speak to you frankly as a Christian, because other religions must defend their own reactions to this. We started by talking about the problem of suffering. And now I want to tell you about a God who suffered. That conversation with my Jewish friends didn't finish where I mentioned. I said to them, you know, I want to say something to you that's going to be very difficult. They said, that's okay. I said, you've gathered by now that I believe that Yeshua is HaMashiach, Jesus is the Messiah. Yes, they said. I said, I believe something even more that's going to be, well, very difficult for you. He said, go on, tell me, what is it you believe? I said, I believe he's God incarnate. He was God. Now I said, you know he was crucified. Yes. Now I said, try and come with me just for a moment. I know it's going to be very difficult, but try and come with me. If that is God on a cross, what is it telling you? I said, at the very least, it's telling you this. It's telling you that God has not remained distant from the problem of human suffering, but has become part of it. And I'll never forget his answer. He says, why has no one ever told me that before? Now, ladies and gentlemen, this is a very deep thing. I've made a dozen massive claims that go against the grain of the naturalism and the academy of the 21st century. But the longer I live and the more I study these things, the more I find them making sense after sense. And not solving the problem, but giving me a way in. You say, why would you believe that story? You, a scientist, why would you believe that story? Well, I believe it, ladies and gentlemen, because Jesus gave evidence of being God incarnate by rising from the dead. And I say that, I believe that as a scientist, there is evidence for it.
Everything that was just covered in this speech, it doesn't holistically answer the problem of natural evil, but like John Lennox said, it gets us in the door. It's not proven that this suffering means there's no God. In fact, the fact that we even believe in the concept of justice and evil is evidence that we are moral beings. And we may not agree on what exactly that evil is, but it shows that we all have in common that we have a conscience. Additionally, our conscience will convict us or condemn us when we do things that it tells us are not right. And that's going to be different for everybody. And you can silence your conscience too. We see that with soldiers in the military. As you kill more and more people, it becomes more dull and you become numb to it. I'm not making any moral claims about soldiers and killing in the military, but I'm just trying to say that our conscience can be silenced, but it is there. And we are not in control of our conscience. We're not in control of the things that we feel like we did that are wrong. And I think that this is a super strong piece of evidence for things that transcend us. Because if there are things that transcend us, like our conscience, like love, like justice, then that demands something higher than us, besides just biochemical adaptations and these physical phenomena. And Neil deGrasse Tyson, he challenged us to bring it on, to bring forth the evidence. And John Lennox made a good case here, but he also rightly pointed out that this issue does not rest on whether or not a good God can exist in the midst of suffering. The crux of the matter really comes down to the historical resurrection of Jesus. Because if Jesus did not rise from the dead, the claims of the Bible is false. He would not be God. That God would not be real. And so, truthfully, if we're really getting down to the nitty-gritty, the more important thing to focus on here is to look at the evidence for the resurrection and determine if it's true. And so I have a great video detailing this on the channel. I'll put on screen right about here. I recommend you check that out. It is very comprehensive and goes into the historical facts that changed a generation of scholars that are historically reliable and aren't just things taken straight out of the Bible. With that being said, I really hope you enjoyed this video. Have a great day. Bye-bye.